Welcome, I'm Kasey, and today we're going to draw a simple dragonfly and then we're going to paint it. This is one that I did a while back, and we're kind of going to go on the same inspiration as this one, so it'll be very similar. So I've got my dragonfly pre-drawn on here in pencil. You shouldn't be able to see it really well, and that's what I want. So first, grab a pencil or a pen, whatever is closest to you, something that's permanent and that won't dissolve in water. So I'm using a Sharpie. So the first thing we're going to do is start with the body of the dragonfly, and maybe about 2/3 of the way up, you're going to do a line across and then bring down kind of a long U shape. So this is just like a little U with a top. Then we're going to go over that with a circle. So this is our dragonfly's head. And inside this head, we're going to make 2 eyes. So these are its eyes. And then inside each of those shapes that we just made, we're going to make like a tiny border. So these are our insect eyes. And then just inside them, I'm just going to kind of scratch with my marker. And I'm kind of just making a very easy, imperfect little grid. So here it is on the other eye. And my lines don't have to go all the way across. And then we're just going to bring that grid down. So now we've given those eyes a little bit of texture. The next thing we're going to do is make a circle for our next part of the insect body. And then we're going to put the long part of the body on here. So this is like a V that gets very skinny and curves at the bottom. And then we come up and it kind of widens to be that circle. So there is the body of our dragonfly. Now the wings, we kind of just want to make them symmetrical. So I'm going to start with at the center of this body, and I'm just going to take a line out almost to the edge of my paper. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm almost to the edge of my paper. And then I'm going to come to the bottom of the body, and I'm going to make a swoopy line that comes up and we round to meet this one. So same thing on this line. We're coming down, and we're going to go up, and we're going to swoop and meet that line. Then on the top, for the wings on the top, we're going to do something very similar. So we're going to start at the top of this body here, and we're going to go up and kind of stop that there. And then same thing from the other side. We're going to go up and stop there. And then you can do the next part. You can come down or you can go out. I like going out because it helps me stay a little bit parallel to that first wing. So I'm going to take this out and swoop up and connect it. And then same deal here. I'm going to go out, and then I'm going to start swooping up and connect it. So now we have the basic structure of the dragonfly drawn. So let's go in and put a little bit of pattern on the body parts. So for this middle part, I'm going to just put some little scales. And these don't have to be incredibly like perfect or anything. This is just kind of like mermaid scales. It's just to give it a little bit of texture. And when you're doing stuff like this, you can do what dragonflies look like in real life, or you can just kind of throw a little imagination into it. So then, to make this body part seem very round, I'm going to do some lines like this, like just big smiles that follow the contour of this circle. And then on the body, I'm going to do sort of the similar contours, but they'll be a little further apart. So I'm just kind of giving it some sections. So there's our body of the dragonfly. And then I'm going to give it two little arms up here. So I'm going to come out at an angle like this. So there's its little arms, and then it has some elbows. So that is the drawing portion of my dragonfly. To get that really interesting kind of textury effect on the dragonfly wing, I'm going to use a crayon. So if you have a crayon handy, grab it. I'm going to use white. You can use any color, any light color will do. So I'm just kind of going to draw a grid pattern on each of these each of these wings. But what you'll notice is you can't really tell where you've put this white crayon, and that's okay. I want you to press down sort of hard with your grid pattern. And it's okay if you're not sure where your grid is. I can't really see mine, but I'm just gonna kind of make some lines. And you want to make sure that you're putting a good amount of pressure on this crayon. So you can't tell, but I'm done with that wing. So I'm going to go down to this wing, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm kind of just going to make this grid pattern with the crayon. And what will happen is when we go in and paint over this with watercolor, the watercolor will not stick where we've pressed hard enough with our crayon, and it's going to make that really interesting pattern on the wing. Now, if you're watching this and you can't find a crayon, don't worry about it. Just take whatever you're drawing with and make a grid pattern in this wing. Sorry, I'm right-handed, so this is going to cover up some of what you can see, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm just making that grid pattern in my wing. All right, and I have one more wing to go. So here we are. Here comes the grid for this wing. And it's okay if it's not perfectly straight. You can make it a little curvy. This is nature, so we can kind of interpret it as we like. And if each wing is a little bit different, that's fine as well. All right, so now I've got my grid pattern drawn on my dragonfly. And what I'm going to do next, you can choose to do this if you want to, or you can do something else with the background. I'm going to paint the background in kind of a lot of different colors, but I'm just going to put some shapes back there that will come through when I paint over them. So in this case, you know, I think I'm going to use a green, maybe a couple of different greens, because it can kind of be like natural elements. So I'm just going to make some little swirls. And remember, you do really need to press down pretty hard for this to work with the watercolor. So don't be afraid to really press down with this crayon. So I'm just making some swirls. And if you don't have crayons, you can choose to do this with a pencil or the marker you're using, or you can just leave them out. That is up to you. It doesn't work to go in and put the crayon in after the watercolor. It has to be there before you put the paint down. And I like to make them very irregular, different sizes. Maybe I'll go in and put some darker green ones around just for effect. And they can overlap or they don't have to. That is your artist privilege. You can decide what they're gonna do. I just want a little bit more interest in my background than what I usually do. All right, so I think that's good for the crayon portion. So I'm gonna be done there. And because it's a little easier to this way, we're not going to mess up the dragonfly if we paint the background in first. I'm going to start painting the background. And what you need to know, what's very important for painting over crayon, is your paint has to be watered down. So I'm just going to throw some water on here first. And I'm only painting, so I'll start with this quadrant. I'm only painting with water first. Just quickly kind of throwing some water in there to wet this part. And I don't want to get into my dragonfly yet. I just want to stay around its little borders. So I think that my background is going to be, I think I'm going to go ahead and do like pinks in the background, maybe pinks and purples. You can do whatever you choose. You don't have to follow my color scheme. So I'm going to go into this magenta color and I'm just going to add it, and you can see how it doesn't stick to the crayon, which is the magic of all this because I've already got all that water down and I can paint right over that crayon and it just resists it, which is awesome and fun. So you can put as much color or as little color in there as you'd like. I'm going to kind of keep it medium, put a medium amount of color in there. And it helps to sort of brush over and see where you have water. So you can see how the waterier my paint is, the more it resists that crayon. But if my paint gets too thick, it starts sticking, like over here. So putting water in there is key to getting it to do this cool resist thing. I think I'm going to make the edges a little bit purpley. So I'm going to just come in and dab some purples around the edge. And let them do what they're going to do. All right, so the next section I'm going to work on is going to be over here because I'm right-handed, so my hand is here and I don't want to smash it through wet paint. So that's why I'm going to go over here. So I'm going to get this section nice and wet. And here's the beauty of painting the background before painting our wing. We haven't done our wings yet, so I'm not going to mess anything up if I come through this little tiny section. So let's go ahead and get most of this wet here. And I'm just trying to keep my water off of that dragonfly itself. So I'm going to come in with my pink like I did before and just kind of get pink in a lot of these sections. Get some pink on the paper in the areas that I've watered down. If your paint seems to be sticking to the crayon, that either means you didn't quite press hard enough with that crayon or you don't have enough water. So grab some more water and just roll right over and see if that makes a difference for you. And I am really going to get in here because I want this pink to show through between these two wings. All right, so then I'm going to go back into this bluish purple that I used and stick some on the edges to give me that kind of darker edge look. So because I want my dragonfly to be the main event here, I'm just gonna put some of this purple around the edge, and I'm gonna leave it to kind of have that glowing pink. So now I'll do the same thing on this edge. I'll paint this quadrant here with just water. And then we'll go in and we'll drop our color once we get it all nice and wet down. And the reason I like to do it in quadrants is because if I try to paint the whole thing with water first and then go in and paint these little detail-y things, that water would dry pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go section by section. And as long as we blend where the sections meet, it's going to be a-okay. So I'm going to grab my little pink, magenta, fuchsia, pinkish purple. You can call this color whatever you want. And I'm just going to add it to all of the spaces that I painted with water. I'm just going to use the tip of my brush when I get around the border of the wing, and that's going to be helpful. And I'm kind of sweeping the water away from the middle where it tends to kind of pool up a little bit. All right, I'm going to get my purple and dab it around these edges. And my purple is kind of coming in a whole lot right here, and that's not really what I want to do. So I dried my brush out, and I'm going to push it over a little bit. All right. So then our last quadrant that we're going to paint just with water down here. Oops, there's a little boundary I didn't quite get very well. Go fix that. All right. So let's just get water down here and get in that little nook right there so that we have all of our background covered. And we'll just kind of wet this whole section. And then down here I just want to make sure it blends with the other section. So I'm going to put enough water there to kind of make that paint blend. And you don't want to scrape too hard over this crayon because you can scrape part of the wax off. We want to let our wax be so that it's able to resist the paint when we come in with our first background color like this. So that's resisting nicely. You can use oil pastels too if you have those and you don't have crayons. Oil pastels are, it's like crayon, but the wax in an oil pastel is harder. Softer. It's more, it's closer to lipstick than a crayon. It's very, it just glides on and you don't have to press super duper hard. But it is a little messier than crayons. All right, so I'm seeing some little edges here that I didn't hit with my water, so I'm gonna go back and touch those. These may be where my crayon is, yeah. So I may have gotten out of the lines with my crayon lines a little bit there, but that's fine. It's gonna look great at the end. And then I'm gonna get my darker kind of purple indigo and just go around the edges here. Just to spread my darker color on this one. And I'm sort of just tapping here because I just want it to interact with the paint and the water that's already down on the paper. So I'm not doing a lot of blending work. I'm kind of just pulling this paint to where the other paint is wet to give it a chance to mingle. I'm not trying super hard to blend it into one color the water action will kind of do that work for us. All right, so now I want you to take a break and let this dry really, really well. If you have a fan or a hair dryer or something where you can really get this dry, go ahead and do that. We want to make sure particularly that around the edges of the Dragonfly, it's very dry. I'm not super concerned with what's happening around these little edges here. But right up next to the Dragonfly, because that's where we're painting next, that's what I need for you to have very dry. So get that nice and dried. I'm going to pull out, I have a little heat gun that I use to dry mine. So I'm going to use that and I will be back. All right, so my painting is dry around the Dragonfly. Now, these edges are very dry. The outside edges you can see are still a little wet, but I'm not worried about those at all. So the first thing you need to decide is what color will my Dragonfly body be? And mine is going to be dark blue, like this dark tealy blue color. So I'm just going straight in and I'm going to paint it with this color. And I want it to be sort of dark. I want to be able to see the patterns that I drew, but I also want it to be kind of dark. So my head, so the eyes are going to be a different color. So stay around your little eye boundary. Get this body painted in. Now as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking I might want to bring a little bit of a darker blue in here. So I'll paint the whole thing one color, but then I might come in and put a little bit more dark on top of it because it's not quite dark enough for what I want. And I went outside my line there, but I'm just gonna not worry about it. No one probably is going to notice that in the end, so. All right, so I'm going to come in. What am I going to do? Let's go in with a little of this purple. So I'm getting some purple, and I'm just going to kind of dot it around the edges and see what happens. Yeah, there we go. That's a little darker. That's what I'm looking for. Okay. I guess my Dragonfly has turned out to be sort of a weird navy teal purple color. All right. I'm going to bring in some water just to get those colors melting together nicely. Doing my best to stay inside the lines that I drew for myself here. Sometimes that can be a challenge with a watercolor brush. If you have a tiny brush, if you have a very fine brush, you could always switch for this step, but I am just going to work with what came with the paint set here. All right, and I see that this is getting a little dark through here, so I dried off my brush and I'm going to roll off some of that paint. And then I'll just spread around what's left, and that lightens it up just enough for me. All right, so we got our body, and I'm gonna paint these eyeballs now. And I think the eyeballs of my bug, let's see, should they be red or green? I think I'm gonna go with green. Go with this lime green, and then if that's too limey, we can stick another color in there, but I wanna kind of keep this light. And if I get done and it's too light and I think it needs to be darker, I'll just dip into some darker paint and make that work. How do we feel about that? I think it needs to be a little darker. So I'm going to go grab some of this aqua and kind of just throw it in there. But now what's happened is we have too much paint in this small space. So So I'm going to have to do the vacuum action where I clean out my brush, I dry it out, and I go back and I kind of vacuum up some of that paint that's there. So I'm rolling it over where I've painted already, and it's going to suck up some of that paint. But I do like this color better than the color that we started with. So now we're going to paint the wings, but I want to make absolutely sure that this line here is dry, because I don't want to come in and, let's see, it's a little wet still, so I'm going to go ahead and dry it with my dryer. If you've got a fan or just a piece of paper sitting around, you can use that, but I'm just going to dry mine a little bit. Just going to make sure that it's not still wet. So that should do the trick. So this is going to be the really fun and magical part of what we do. And your wings can really, they can have a variation of color in them. I'm going to go over them with water first. So I'm going to go over my first wing with water, and just to get some water in there to the very edges. And you can start seeing where your crayon is, hopefully. And these little parts where I painted over accidentally, I'm just going to kind of scribble them with water. Okay, so what color should these wings be? I think I'm going to start with this blue-green and see what happens. Yes, I like this. Okay, so I'm adding this blue-green, and you can see how our grid's coming through. You can also see where I didn't press hard enough, like right here and over here, but we're still getting kind of a grid pattern. So I may want to add, what do I want to add to this? A tiny bit of purple. So I'm just going to come in maybe along the bottom edge and add a little purple to some of these sections. And if that purple gets too intense, just go dry off, like right here, that's a little much. So I'm just going to take it away. There we go. All right, so same thing over here. I'm just going to put down some water. This is probably the most important step, is to put that water down first, because that's going to help assure that you have enough water for the paint to resist. Because like we said, if that paint has too much, if there's too much pigment in the paint you're putting down, it doesn't resist well. So I don't want that water super pooling. I just want it to be wet. So we'll see if I did any better with my pressure on the crayon in this one. Oh, I did a terrible job with pressure on my crayon over here. So some of that texture is coming through, some's not. That's all right. I'm just going to add a tiny bit of purple to some of these sections just to give it that variation. All right. And then I'm going to roll some of that water off. And in just a moment, I will pause this and let my squeaky barking dog out of the room. All right, so let's see about these bottom wings. So I'm going to get water and just gently go over the bottom one. And then I'm going to bring in my blue-green. Add it. Cool. And then drop a little purple in there. And that is a lot of purple, so I'm going to roll some of it off. Go in and roll off some of that purple. go. And I see a couple of places it's too dark, so I'm going to put a little more water in there to kind of give it more of a wash look. Alright, and then our last wing, let's come in and put water in there. You can see my water's getting a little more blue and purple, which is fun. And then we get a little of this blue and come in and go over it just very lightly. And then add a tiny bit of purple just to those bottom sections. Just kind of tap it around. And then go back like we did last time and sort of take some of it away. Move it around. So you can see how that's given us kind of a good textural effect on our dragonfly wings. And the harder you press with that crayon, I think I didn't press as hard over here because that's my not dominant hand side. So if you have the ability to flip your paper around, that might be advantageous. Alright, so I am ready for the reveal because I know my edges are dry. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this tape. It's going to give me my pretty clean line. And I mean, sometimes it's not the clean line, but that's alright. There's my final drawing, and what I definitely want to do is sign it with my name. So I'm going to go back in with my marker and put my signature on it, and there's my dragonfly.